Step into a medieval English castle in the dead of winter, where the air bites and the stone walls seem to pulse with cold. Places like Dover or Warwick loom as symbols of power, their towering ramparts built to fend off armies. But when winter's icy grip tightens, these fortresses turn into something else entirely. A frozen labyrinth where survival is a daily puzzle. On Boring History, we're not here to spin fairy tales of knights and feasts by roaring fires. The truth is far grittier, far more human, and honestly, far more fascinating. How did people live, work, and endure in these stone giants when the wind howled and the frost crept through every crack? Grab a warm drink, settle in, and let's unravel the mystery of surviving a winter in a medieval castle, where every scrap of warmth was a hard-won victory. Imagine walking through the gates of Kenilworth Castle, the air so cold your breath hangs like a ghost. These castles were marvels of engineering, with walls 2 or 3 meters thick, designed to laugh off battering rams and arrows. But when winter swept across England, those same walls became traitors, stealing warmth and radiating dampness that sank into your bones. The semi-darkness inside, pierced only by slivers of light through narrow windows, made every room feel like a crypt. Forget cozy evenings by the fire. These were places where comfort was a fantasy, and survival demanded ingenuity. There was no insulation as we know it, just bare stone, sometimes brushed with a thin layer of plaster or whitewash if you were lucky. So how did people keep from freezing in a fortress that seemed to conspire against them? The answer is in the layers they built, not just on their bodies but on the castle itself. Those stone walls, cold as death, were draped with heavy woolen tapestries, woven by local hands or imported from Flanders. These weren't just decorations, though they might show grand scenes of hunts or biblical tales. They were lifelines, trapping a thin pocket of air between the stone and the living space, a fragile barrier against the chill. Castle inventories from the 14th and 15th centuries, like those from Bolton or Warkworth, list cloths to cover the hall or woolen curtains for the window openings. In humbler corners, where tapestries were a pipe dream, people used whatever they could: old cloaks, coarse sacking, even animal skins. Sometimes, they'd stuff dry moss or straw between the fabric and the wall for extra insulation, a trick born of necessity. It was like wrapping a stone giant in a patchwork quilt, stitch by stitch to steal a little warmth back. Sleeping in a castle was its own battle. You didn't dare push your bed against the wall unless you wanted to wake up feeling like you'd slept on ice. Beds were moved to the center of the room, or at least as far from the masonry as space allowed. If that wasn't possible, people set up wooden screens or hung more curtains to block the cold. Every night, as you climbed into bed, you were waging a quiet war against the stone, hoping your makeshift defenses would hold. It's almost poetic, isn't it? These castles, built to protect from invaders, forced their inhabitants to protect themselves from the very walls meant to keep them safe. Yet they did it, not by changing the stone's nature but by outsmarting it with every scrap they could find. Now, let's step into the Great Hall, the heart of a castle like Winchester or Westminster, where lords flexed their power and feasts dazzled guests. These halls were grand, with soaring ceilings and massive windows that let in more cold than light. In winter, they were cavernous iceboxes, the stone floors radiating chill and the high rafters swallowing any warmth. The central hearth, a fire pit in the middle of the hall, was the main source of heat in early castles. It glowed with life, drawing people like moths, but its warmth barely reached a few meters before fading into a cold, echoing void. Your breath would hang in the air, and every sound would bounce off the walls, a reminder of how vast and unforgiving the space was. By the 13th century, wall fireplaces with chimneys, like those at Conisbrough Castle, were a step forward. They funneled smoke out and focused heat better. But even a few fireplaces couldn't tame a hall the size of a cathedral. The stone sucked up heat like a sponge, leaving frost in the corners and a haze of warmth only near the fire. So how did people make this livable? They didn't try to heat the whole hall. That was a fool's errand. Instead, they carved out smaller spaces within it, like islands in a frozen sea. Heavy tapestries, woolen curtains, and wooden screens were used to create cozy enclaves where people ate, slept, and worked. Castle records mention buying yards of cloth to divide the hall or setting up screens by the fire. The floor was blanketed with straw or reeds, not because people were messy, but because it trapped air and kept the cold at bay. In fancier spots, like the Lord's table, woven carpets or animal skins went over the straw for extra warmth. Windows, those drafty slits, were sealed with shutters and draped with cloth. Old blankets, cloaks, anything to block the wind. Tables were pushed close to the fire, and sleeping spots for servants were tucked into niches behind screens, away from drafts. The hall's grandeur was for summer. In winter, life shrank to these warm pockets where survival trumped spectacle. You can almost see it, can't you? Huddling in one of those makeshift shelters, the firelight dancing on the tapestry walls, your fingers just warm enough to hold a bowl of steaming pottage. Chroniclers like Gerald of Cambria paint a vivid picture. Ladies wrapped in furs, ink freezing in inkwells if they strayed too far from the fire. The secret was in zoning, in knowing how to trap precious heat and make a small corner of a vast hall feel like home. The castle wasn't just a single space. It was a maze of nooks and crannies, each a potential lifeline if you knew how to use it. Beyond the Great Hall, the castle's complex layout offered hidden allies in the fight against winter. Small rooms, window niches, and passages built for defense doubled as shelters from the cold. Places like Bodiam Castle had stone window seats, little alcoves that became warm havens when draped with cloth or furs. Behind a heavy curtain, with a brazier of hot coals at your feet, you could carve out a bubble of comfort in a frozen world. Archaeological finds at castles like Porchester or Orford reveal hooks and fasteners in the walls, proof that people hung fabric partitions to trap heat in these tiny spaces. Furniture was a weapon too. Massive wooden armchairs with high backs and sides, upholstered in leather or thick cloth, shielded you from drafts and held your body heat. Near a fireplace with a screen for extra protection, you could almost feel cozy. Beds were the ultimate fortresses. For the nobility, they were massive, raised on platforms to avoid the icy floor, and draped with heavy curtains or canopies that reached the ground. These baldachins created a sealed space where your body heat, and maybe your spouse's or a servant's, could linger. It was like sleeping in a warm tent inside a cold stone box. Even the placement of candles or oil lamps was strategic. You didn't set them in the open where their heat would vanish. You tucked them into niches or near fabric walls, where their faint warmth could make a difference. Every choice, from where you sat to where you placed a light, was a move in the chess game of survival. The human body itself was a furnace, and people leaned into that. Clothing was your first line of defense, a personal armor against the cold. Forget the delicate silks of summer manuscripts. Winter meant heavy, layered wool, England's greatest asset. You'd start with a coarse linen undershirt, then pile on tunics, coats, and cloaks, all wool, sometimes lined with more wool or, for the rich, fur. Hoods with long tails kept your head and neck warm, every piece tied tightly to block drafts. Shoes were leather, stuffed with straw or moss, because walking barefoot on stone was a fast track to sickness. At night, you might sleep in some of your clothes, especially if you were in a drafty corner. Beds were piled with blankets, furs, and sometimes heated with stones or metal warmers filled with coals. Sleeping several to a bed wasn't just about space, it was about sharing heat. Even dogs were welcome, their furry warmth a blessing at your feet. Food was your inner fire. Winter meals were about calories, fat, and staying warm. Pottage, a thick stew of grains, legumes, and root vegetables, simmered for hours, staying hot enough to warm your hands and core. Fat was gold, lard, bone marrow, or grease went into everything, giving you the energy to fight the cold. Meat, when available, was fatty, pork, mutton, or game like venison, served hot to maximize its warmth. Bread, usually rye or barley, was often dipped in fat for extra calories. Spices like pepper or ginger, though costly, were prized for their warming magic, believed to stir the blood. Hot drinks, spiced ale, mulled wine for the rich, or herb-infused water for the rest were a lifeline. Every bite, every sip, was fuel to keep your body's furnace burning against the castle's relentless chill. The castle's floors were another battlefield. Stone slabs, even when tightly fitted, had cracks that let in moisture and drafts. Straw or reeds were spread thickly to create an insulating cushion, replaced regularly to stay dry. In the Lord's chambers, carpets or furs went over the straw for extra warmth and status. Drafts were a constant enemy, sneaking through doorways and corridors built for defense, not comfort. Heavy woolen curtains or leather drapes, weighted with metal or clay, were hung over openings to block the wind. Gaps under doors or around windows were stuffed with rags, moss, or soot, anything to stop the cold. In windy corridors, temporary wooden partitions or screens were set up, a daily task of patching holes in the castle's defenses. You had to know your castle, to read its drafts like a map and counter them with every trick you had. Windows were a weak point, letting in light but also cold. In the early Middle Ages, glass was a rare luxury, so most windows were covered with oiled cloth or parchment, letting in dim light but little protection. Some used polished horn plates, stronger but dull. By the 14th century, glass appeared in important rooms, but service areas and corridors often stayed unglazed. Shutters were closed and extra cloth, old blankets, cloaks, was hung to seal out drafts. Sometimes, windows were boarded up or filled with clay and straw, leaving just a sliver for light. It was a trade-off. Less light for more warmth, turning the castle into a shadowy cave where firelight ruled. The hearth was the castle's heartbeat, but it wasn't perfect. Early central hearths, just fire pits in the hall, gave light but lost most of their heat to the rafters. Smoke escaped through roof holes or windows, often choking the room. Wall fireplaces, spreading in the 12th and 13th centuries, were a revolution, directing smoke out and focusing heat. Decorated with carvings or heraldic symbols, they were a status symbol as much as a heat source. But they only warmed the space in front of them and demanded piles of firewood. Braziers, portable metal or ceramic vessels filled with coals, were a fallback, placed under tables or near beds. They were dangerous, though, with risks of carbon monoxide or fires from stray sparks. Castle inventories list coal bowls for the chambers or braziers for the hall. A reminder of how precious and perilous heat was. The castle's architecture offered subtle allies. Thick walls, up to 4 meters in places like Rochester, held heat once warmed, cooling slowly like a stone battery. The solar, the Lord's private quarters, was smaller and easier to heat, tucked high above the hall. Wooden paneling or partitions added warmth, and narrow windows built for defense limited heat loss. Spiral staircases and winding corridors slowed drafts, each turn a barrier to the cold. Kitchens, with their constant fires, sent heat seeping into nearby rooms, especially if chimneys ran through the walls. Even garderobes, the stone toilets, could catch faint warmth from nearby flues, making them less frigid. Vestibules with double doors acted like airlocks, stopping cold air from rushing in. These weren't designed for comfort, but they were tools people used with skill. Crowding was a survival tactic. Every body, human or animal, radiated heat, and in winter people packed together. The great hall, kitchens, and workshops were hubs where servants, soldiers, and families gathered, sharing warmth. Beds were communal, with spouses, children, or servants piling in to trap heat. Animals were key, dogs and cats curled up on beds or laps, their warmth a small gift. In harsh winters, sheep or goats might be brought into lower rooms, their breath adding to the heat. It wasn't pleasant. Imagine the smell of sweat, smoke, and manure, but survival trumped comfort. Food fueled this crowded community. Pottage was the staple, thick with barley, peas, or turnips, cooked slow to stay hot. Fat was king, stirred into everything for calories. Meat, when available, was fatty and hot: pork, mutton, or game. Bread, rye or barley, was a warm comfort, often smeared with lard. Spices like pepper or cinnamon warmed the body, and hot drinks, spiced ale, mulled wine, or herbal water, were a ritual. Winter feasts like Christmas were survival strategies, filling the hall with people, fire, and food. Dancing and laughter warmed the air as much as the hearths, a reminder that community was as vital as calories. The castle's hierarchy shaped access to warmth. The lord and his family had the solar, with its fireplace and fur-lined beds. Guests crowded the hall's fire, while servants scraped by on straw pallets or kitchen heat. Guards shivered in towers, their cloaks and braziers their only defense. Yet winter leveled things slightly, everyone fought the same cold. The lord needed servants to keep his fire burning. The cook relied on the guard to protect the castle. Survival was a team effort, a web of people and animals holding the cold at bay. What hits me hardest about this world is its resilience. These weren't fairy tale castles. They were harsh, unforgiving homes where every day was a test. Yet people didn't just survive. They found ways to live, to laugh, to feast. Every tapestry hung, every bed shared, every bowl of pottage was an act of defiance. They turned stone crypts into homes with ingenuity and community, finding warmth in the darkest months. It's a story that feels alive, that reminds us of our own strength in tough times. A scrap of wool, a shared meal, a dog at your feet. These were the threads of survival woven into a tapestry of human will. On Boring History, we're not just about dates and names, we're about the smells, sounds, and feel of the past. If this journey through the frozen castles of medieval England sparked your curiosity, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments. What's the toughest winter you've faced, and how did you stay warm? We've got more stories to tell, more mysteries to uncover. So join us next time to keep history anything but boring. Stay warm, and we'll see you soon.